today's topic will be about supplier collaboration and the importance of this for buyers all over the world who are looking to find a supplier, collaborate with them, whether they're already collaborating with a supplier or they're looking to find a new one. So you're going to talk us through a little bit about that and why this is so important. So could you give us a little bit of background into you again, just to remind us?
Yeah. So yes, so I run a business called Supplier Strategies, which is focused on helping my clients, which are companies large and small, to collaborate better with their supply chain partners in order to derive value for both sets of partners going forward in the relationship. Because 47% of collaboration projects fail to deliver the value that was expected. And I've done some research into why that is, and I believe I'm in the right, I have the right skills and knowledge to help my clients navigate this quite difficult path with collaboration, which is complex and it's difficult and it can be messy.
So when a company goes into a new collaboration, what do you see as some of the pitfalls happening as to why that collaboration breaks down so often?
Well, collaboration, as I mentioned, is a complex issue. It can break down for a number of reasons, but if you boil them all down, they come down to a lack of alignment or a lack of keeping that relationship aligned, or there's a mismatch in skills or outcomes that weren't expected. So most of it's alignment and keeping that alignment going. Some of the successful ones, their collaborations end naturally after a number of years because they've got the value they wanted, and the companies start looking around for other opportunities, and that's fine. But generally they fail because companies, maybe start off with all good intentions but become misaligned as they're working, and that's why there are certain sets of attributes that people need, individuals need, teams need, functions need, organizations need, and it's that multi-layer complexity that makes it a tricky thing to navigate.
I think that brings into limelight the importance of the initial research that a buyer or company or organization puts in initially before they go into the collaboration, to see if actually they are aligned with each other prior and have the same kind of outlook and they understand each other, because sometimes there's some misunderstanding and that can lead to problems later down the line. So it really does highlight that. What skills and attributes do you think collaborators need to bring to the table to ensure this is a successful collaboration and relationship?
There are a number of these skills and attributes. The one that comes to mind top first is there's an aptitude to collaborate. Now that might be obvious to say, but it's in reality we've lived in an environment where in people's careers the information is king. You have information that your colleagues don't have, that puts you at an advantage. And that's broken down in the workplace a bit in recent years. But when it comes with suppliers, having that bit of information is competitive advantage against with other suppliers or other companies in your market. So sharing and being open with information, it doesn't come naturally to a lot of procurement minds, at least. And that's one of the key attributes I see: being open, sharing, being wanting to see what problem you can solve of your partners, as opposed to, you know, what's my problem. So it's understanding your collaboration partners requirements, their problems, their, you know, understanding and being able to offer solutions, and selflessly. And that is that selflessness that needs to be shared, not only by the, and this is the same with all these attributes, they need to be shared not only by the individuals in the team, but the team collectively, the function, and the organization more widely. And that's quite tricky, because, you know, each of those layers, the individual employee, the function, the organization, need to be able to, they need to be aligned internally in their own companies before they can align with their collaborators. And now you start to see the complexity here, because you've got 3 layers there, you've got 2 partners, you've got this bunch of attributes, and, you know, and within all those, there's some context that needs to be thought about as well. So, you know, bear that in mind when I go through these attributes. You know, they need to be shared by at least 6 parties, and you know, but having these ones are the, you know, the basis. So I've talked about collaboration. There's communication. You know, communicating. You know, when problems arise, and not, you know, seeing if we can hush it up until it's covered up, is not, you know, that's not a way to go. You need to be open and communicate issues, problems, and again, that doesn't come naturally to at least procurement people. I think it's probably the same for salespeople and business people generally. They generally, you know, like to minimize problems. You know, you can't do that when you're working in close collaboration with the supplier. Another one would be consistency, working consistently, and that's bringing your whole self to work. That sort of idea where you turn up, you show up every day, and you give your 100%. Now, again, this is kind of, it's sounding like it's a sort of Coles to Newcastle thing, but it's really matters when it comes to collaboration, because if partners see that, you know, that maybe the other partner isn't kind of pulling their weight, if they're you know, if they're not consistently showing up and you know, and putting forward ideas to solve problems, then they're going to start feeling that they're carrying more weight, and that leads to, you know, friction. And what you're trying to do all the time is minimize the friction, so that the people that are doing the actual collaborating and working, you know, they can do their job. So yeah, I can go on. There's quite a few of these attributes, but they all, you know, they're about cost management as well. They're about working to deadlines and time management. You know, they're common things, but they need to be present in your team.
You touched on initially collaboration. Do you see the benefit in having a digitalized system then as a supplier, where the buyer can feed in information as and when and check each stage of their process to see if it's been fully understood? Or do you see more benefit in it being offline and more of a, you know, talking over the phone? Because now outsourcing is becoming such a large portion of manufacturing and collaborations in general. It's quite difficult sometimes for the supplier and buyer to physically meet. So do you see any benefit there in the collaboration field?
Absolutely, and in fact, I work with collaborators myself to try and offer this kind of functionality to my clients. So, you know, there needs to be somewhere, even if it's you know, if it's existing software, even if it's a SharePoint site or something that brings those parties together, where they can share that information that's up to date, timely, that has some traceability, and that will bring me on to another area we need to talk about in governance. All of this needs to come together, and having a digital platform to do that on is essential. I can't see how they would work otherwise, if in today's business environment, where that information needs to be up to date to the minute and shareable amongst the people that need to see it.
Definitely, which brings you to your second point, which was communication. Again, that really improves the communication between the two companies. From our side, as a manufacturing platform, communication is crucial. Most of our buyers are not in the same country as we are, so transparency and the help of our platform really does aid us with communicating with our buyers. And lastly, you touched on consistency, which again is very important, and again brings us to highlight the importance of the initial research that somebody's doing to check about the supplier company. How long has it been going for? How are the customer reviews? Are these customers returning? Things like that, to check that the collaboration can be a long-term one. Yeah. So what are the skill deficits procurement have in regards to this collaboration, in your view?
Well, I've touched on a few. In the modern work environment, some of these skills that we need, or attributes, I want to differentiate between skills and attributes. The attributes, don't come naturally, but they can be fostered. I think where it comes to skills, where it's learned behavior, I think procurement has a number of challenges, because procurement people are very, very good at negotiating butting heads. It can be quite macho. They're very good at managing cost savings, and they're focused on that. Great, all good things for procurement to be able to do. But when it comes to supplier collaboration, procurement have got to wear a slightly different hat. They've got to start thinking about the longer term, and how they can where they see the company going with this collaboration. And and this brings you back to this research that you need to do at the beginning of the process to find the right partners. Are those partners in tune with us? Do they share our values? Are they a good cultural fit? Do we fit in a business sense? All of those kind of things are they're outside of the procurement box. And so they need to start thinking more like the CEO than a procurement person. And I think at the moment, don't get me wrong, I think these skills are more than, or I'd say rather, procurement has more than enough talent in it to get these skills. I'm not saying it doesn't possess these skills at all, but what I'm saying is that they're not they're not developed enough, I think, at the moment, to take real advantage of the value that supplier collaboration can bring.
Yeah, definitely. Some very interesting points. What role do you see stakeholders playing in this?
Okay, so stakeholders, this is a really interesting area, because as I said before, the complexity comes because collaborators aren't aligned, but when you start off with that, thinking about that, you need to think about alignment within within the organization. And I'm willing to bet there isn't a procurement function on the planet that doesn't have problems with its stakeholders. Because whether it's stakeholders not understanding the value of procurement, and procurement not being able to convey what it does and why it needs to use its processes to work with a supplier, rather than the other business function going off and just working on its own. What procurement brings to the table, that conversation is happening in almost every company every day. Why should I? You just hold us up with your processes, and you need to avoid child labor or whatever the checks that procurement need to do for in a particular industry. So there's that relationship needs to be stronger and aligned earlier, and so stakeholders, they're the clue is in their title. Then they're stakeholders because they want something from this supplier relationship, and they're looking to procurement to, again, give that frictionless kind of basis for that value creation to work. And if they're not aligned internally, and if they're not on board with everything else that procurement is saying about how this relationship should work, then you're already struggling at the beginning to maximize the value of the relationship. So stakeholders and procurement need to be aligned totally with this. So it's not going to work in all areas of the business, because there will always be some stakeholders that are more difficult to please than others.
Excellent. Thank you for that insight. And how important do you see governance in supplier collaboration?
Now, I think governance in the end is the key. One of the issues that we found is that suppliers and their partners start off with all good intentions. They both line up in terms of what they want from the relationship, how they're going to divide the spoils, how they're going to work together on a day-to-day, what the escalation paths are in different parts of the process, and all that. They start off very well, but they soon diverge as time goes on, people become less engaged or whatever. The governance is really key to making sure that these supplier relationships work on a long-term basis, and it's too important to leave to the functional teams. Functional teams need to be represented in these governance instruments, but they need to overall need to be governed as much as possible by the wider organization. It will have a dispassionate view of what goes on on the operational side, and so the idea is obviously it's not operational, so it can have a dispassionate view, and be that critical friend that the people in that function working together with their suppliers really need to keep them on track. So that governance has to be positive. It has to be consistent, i.e. show up, not just sit there and it's not a passenger bus, it's an active role. And it needs to tread a balance between being very active and interested and hands off. And again, so that's a tricky balancing act, but in the end, they need to be quite dispassionate about the emotion that can stir up when things are working well or badly on the shop floor, and that's where they add value.
What advice would you give a company who is considering outsourcing their supply chain in terms of choosing their supplier, and they're in their initial stages? What advice would you give?
I would say you do your homework. You need alignment. You need to make sure that these suppliers or these people you're outsourcing to share your ambitions, your cultural outlook, and I don't mean culture as in nationality or anything like that, but business culture, which I think is differs from company to company, but it's definitely a business culture that's shared. It's a global thing, but there are certain differences in terms of how companies regard innovation, for instance, or how they regard employees, for instance. So they need to share the same. There needs to be a cultural fit. They need obviously to have similar goals, both financially and in terms of products. They need to so the cultural, and also they need to be open to collaboration, and and be willing to give as much as they get. So it's having a mindset of the win-win, rather than, so it's the real collaboration part, as opposed to co-opetition or competition, any of those. It's really working together, and that's that's quite difficult, and I think quite rare in business. So I would say certainly. And in terms of things like the green agenda as well, if you're thinking about net zero, think about or if you're particularly interested in ethical sourcing, you've got to ensure that you're working with companies that share those values. It's very important.
Excellent, and thank you for those contributions. We have heard a lot in this last year on not putting all your eggs in one basket. Do you see any benefits in having multiple suppliers and expanding one's supply network to mitigate supply chain risk?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those procurement evergreen things. So having multiple suppliers is very good for managing risk, especially in terms of commodity type procurement. So if you need to procure something like steel or raw materials, having multiple suppliers is a good hedge against risk. And any good sourcing manager will understand the different types of risk there are to his supply chain, and maybe his supplier has got a manufacturing plant that's situated on a near a volcano or something, or whatever. So all those type of things that a good sourcing manager will be on top of those things, and will understand that they need to mitigate that by splitting the shipments between 2 or 3, maybe 4 suppliers. That's all good, and obviously with that comes the opportunity to trade suppliers against each other, so that you can get good prices. This is standard procurement stuff. But there's also a lot to be said about suppliers building relationships with their customers based on specific requirements, and so that's a different form of procurement, as it were, because then you start thinking about manufacturing for a specific customer. Then you've got a lot of costs involved in that, so you want to make sure that supplier relationship is stronger and is more difficult to swap out for the customer.
Do you see any benefit then, based on that, expanding on that, in having a supplier with multiple locations, so that if for any reason something happened in one of the locations which meant their manufacturing facilities had to close down, they were able to kind of shift the production to another area? So we're seeing now these kind of companies are becoming more and more popular because they do lower the risk of issues in the supply chain should anything happen in a specific area.
Oh, absolutely. The more stable your supplier is, and again, A good sourcing manager will be on top of, how stable that company is as a supplier, how it's expanded, how, where its distribution and its fabs are, where it, and it will look at that supplier's track record in terms of on-time delivery and all of those issues to see that supplier is, the right one for them. It's very important, and we know that the world, especially at the moment with COVID, is things change. Things can change very quickly, and even the in the safest countries, something could happen to disrupt supply. That's life, and we have to. It's not so much what happens; it's how you deal with it. And how your suppliers deal with it, that's going to make the difference between you and your competitors. So yes, that kind of relationship with those suppliers is key.
Excellent. Yes, I totally agree. Is there anything else you would like to add before we draw this video to a close regarding supplier collaboration and the importance of it?
I would just say that I think that it's going to become more and more important. I know procurement people have been saying this for a while, but I think deriving value through your supply chain is going to be so important in the coming years. And I mentioned just the green agenda earlier, but when you've got mounting pressure from all parts of the business now, looking at net zero by 2050. Some companies are saying 2030, and my view is that no company is going to be in net zero until its whole supply chain is at net zero, and that's a huge undertaking. In fact, in Bill Gates' book he released recently, he said it's going to be impossible, but there's going to be more and more pressure to do this. So working with suppliers to fund or to drive the technologies that are going to lead to a cleaner world, clean technologies, carbon capture, whatever tomorrow brings in terms of electric vehicles and so forth. Supplier collaboration is going to be key in us even dreaming of meeting those targets. As there's more pressure on meeting net zero deadlines, we're gonna there's going to be more emphasis on suppliers and supply chain collaboration to meet those requirements.
Okay, excellent. That's really informative, and again very useful for anybody who's thinking of developing any collaboration with a future potential supplier, or indeed one they already have and they want to improve their relationship. So thank you once again for joining us on this webinar. It's been really insightful, and we really appreciate your time, Andrew.
Thank you.